the 100 Years Quest story, obviously, in its main kind of focus pathway, is going after each of the dragon gods and defeating them in whatever way they have to be, quote unquote, sealed. But Mishima has introduced aspects into the story that are relevant into the ongoing events, but aren't really part of the 100 Years Quest. I mean, first off, technically, I was gonna say we got like stuff like the White Witch and stuff, and like White Wizard, and Diablos. But Diablos ended up kind of being part of the 100 Years Quest. Like, obviously they're connected. We know now by the lore that they are connected to it, but it's kind of how it connected. Obviously, when for the longest time we didn't really know exactly what their deal was, and then we also have the White Wizards. At some point, somewhere, this character is going to be a thing. And then we ended up getting things like Ellentir, which was really cool. Finding out about like stuff like that, like Beta Heaven. I think Beta Heaven's definitely got to come back at some point. But essentially just kind of like things that add to the story, but also are ongoing events in the story, have their own ongoing plot lines going on, besides the Dragon Gods. And one that we were introduced to recently was the whole negative legacy of the humans. And I actually really liked how the fan translation put it, because I had to go look at the accuracy, not of theirs, but in connecting the fan translation and how it's written in Japanese, and it is negative legacy in the Japanese version. I think in the officials, I think they call it like something like a dark legacy or something, or like our infamous legacy, when Igneo was talking about Acnologia, because that's the thing that is really intriguing about it, is Mishima, like, obviously in context to the story, it's just like Elisari is just referring to what the humans are doing as the negative legacy. I don't think that from the standpoint of how he's talking, he's saying it in the same way that Igneo was going to say it. But from Mishima, obviously Mishima's writing it, he went out of his way to compare the two things in how they're referred to as. Igneo referred to Acnologia as the negative legacy of the dragons. Obviously it was the dragons that were for humans that were the reason that dragon slaying magic exists, obviously, with Irene's side and everything. But with the humans, we don't know exactly what their negative legacy is, but it's been put up with like super weapons, things like Face, things like Etherion. The difference is, I want to look at like the context of Acnologia and the context of the story, because obviously this is all big theory. Like, this is all just going off of a couple pieces that I believe are connecting points. I can get a vague estimation and guess onto what exactly the negative legacy is, because stuff like Etherion and Face are brought up. Now, with Etherion is, from the standpoint of Mishima, it's an ongoing thing that he puts in his stories. It was in Rave Masters and Eden Through as well, but from the context of the fairy tale story itself, Etherion is this government super weapon that they have. And another one is Face, but I personally, I'm going to do a video on it, kind of going over a little bit. I'll just kind of give it TLDR of my belief, at least on Face, is Mishima went out of his way to have the hands in Ellentir, but then connect them to Alta Face. And it's because of that, I think that in Earthland, there has to be some form of origin behind Alta Face that's different from Etherion. Like Etherion, it could have just been something that they made. It's something that they designed as pretty much just a big weapon. Whereas, like, I think Face wasn't made by the Magic Council. I don't think it was made by any of the countries. I think it was some form of old existence that always has been. I don't go too much into detail on my theories on it, but one of the reasons that one of the connecting points I do think that is the case is when the hand came up in Ellentir, Ferris acted like, oh, this is no big deal. This is something that is regular in Ellentir. So it's always been a thing here. So I would imagine that if that's the case in Face, Mishima, again, connecting, I mean, the thing that all the hands came off was called Alta Face. And it had apparently always been there since Ellentir. And I'm wondering if Mishima is going to do something similar with that whole thing and kind of reveal maybe on something with hands that maybe is like the Earthland version, maybe connecting to Face. Again, that's big question mark. Nobody knows. But the other thing, like the ideas of that, it's like they made a let's assume that my theories are correct, just in the context of how I'm going to describe. my whole take on the negative legacy that the humans have. With the Therion, imagine they made a big weapon. We have a giant artillery firepower weapon in case we need to go to war or something. With Face, the thing that made Face so much as like a deadly weapon obviously was its ability to kind of erase magic, but also it was a super contingency plan if they ever got invaded by Alvarez, because if they erased all the magic, then none of the wizards that come in are going to be able to gather magic from around them. I would wonder how that exactly would work, because like the idea, unless Face is always going off, then say like if it just erased magic all around and there's no magic there, I would assume they have to stay on, because once they're destroyed it kind of like start to wear off, versus like if they go off they would have just erased magic forever. I don't think that was the case. It would, I assume that they're always active, kind of like a radio jammer, but specifically with magic. But it would just prevent Alvarez or any other wizards from coming in and invading if they ever so chose. Okay, now think of that one. It's a defensive last resort to potential, like to push back and just kind of like intimidate, but like invaders, potentially an invading empire that could easily dominate us if it came down to a war. And with the negative legacy, with how Igneal stated it, that, you know, obviously we know that the side that was for humans and their connections, you know, with Irene and stuff, they eventually invented Dragon Slaying Magic. Dragon Slaying Magic eventually got out of hand. Acnologia got figured out how to use it, and then just went on a rampage. So the dragons were indirectly responsible for Acnologia, and for the humans, it makes me wonder if it's done in a way that it's also maybe a living kind of weapon. Because again, a Therion, kind of like a big blast cannon kind of like weapon. You have Face, it's like a defensive last resort kind of weapon. Imagine this. Again, this is just a theory. You gotta look at it from the perspective of the council. Like, they have a Therion as their big mega weapon if they have to use something. If they logically have to use it to destroy whatever their target is. Like, we know that like their whole reason of using it in Tower of Heaven was to destroy the R system, destroy the Tower of Heaven, so Jalal couldn't potentially resurrect Zareth. And with Alta Face, again, a more defensive kind of like shielding thing, if in case they have to use that to kind of like to prevent people from coming in. It's something that it's like, okay, well, they might invade and we can't beat them, so we have this just in case, so that if we have to, we can erase all the magic. We won't have magic ourselves, but it'll be a whole different war, because it would just be, you know, regular humans. I mean, granted, some of the demons would have been fine, because obviously curse power and stuff, which actually is slightly funny, because there's a plot point in Fairy Girls where it's like a dude is like, we want to not focus as much on magic, we want people to be able to rely on science too. And it's like, if you guys did that and then just turn Face on, there's really nothing that Alvarez magically, I think, could have really done. Obviously, like, that people like Zareth and crazy powerful people, but from a magic standpoint, and then you have science and whatever they can make of a science, they'd actually have a really good advantage. I mean, they could easily just have someone like Irene pull in a meteor, but irrelevant from that. But imagine how that would go from the standpoint of the humans, because the council knew, like, the people that were in knowledge of the larger scale magic world, as we saw with Laharl and Mest, is that they knew about Acnologia. Like, they knew something that most people really wouldn't. And with Makarov, we don't know if Makarov knew it was, like, Acnologia was a real thing, or if he thought he was, like, not real. He was maybe some form of nightmare creation for storybooks or something. But when Mest and Laharl both just heard the mention of Acnologia, they're like, we're getting out of here. We're not even going to remotely attempt to deal with that. But when you think about that, the council knows a lot. They know a lot about what's out there in the world, and they also are clearly willing to get down aggressively to the point where they might set off Face if they have to in order to fight back against enemies and stuff, but also to kind of keep their own position of power, keep their own kind of spot. And I feel like with the humans, what would be something that their own negative legacy could be? Because think about this. God Serena was the 10th Wizard Saint that sat at the top. I mean, I guess he's one of the 10 Wizard Saints, rather. And because I was going to say, like, we technically never found out about all the Wizard Saints. We only actually have, like, was it like 8 or something? of them. Either way, with the Wizard Saints, you have God Serene at the very top. They know about him. They know he's got dragon slaying magic and stuff. Well, I assume they would know. It'd be really weird if they didn't at least know that aspect of him, considering August just knew him at, like, right off the top of, pretty much just immediately, like, was able to kind of talk about his dragon slaying magic knowledge. So either, like, he gave him a full scope or something, or other people were just completely oblivious. I would assume that the intel people of the council would know if they know about someone like Acnologia. But with that, it's like, okay, well, from the point of view, say, of one of the council people, you know that there's this absurdly powerful dragon out there. You're the strongest person that you know of that is, you know, quote unquote on your side is God Serena Dragon Slayer. What if the council, or the humans rather, maybe it's more than just the council of Ishgall, so maybe there's something way more ancient going on. What if they try to create a dragon slayer to eventually fight Acnologia? Or maybe it's even older. Maybe it could be the origins of god slaying magic, and eventually at some point they invented like a way to fight against gods with magic or something, like there some form of kind of creating a living weapon. And I feel like making a dragon slayer would make a lot of sense from, again, if, you know, from the context and knowledge of the characters in the story. If you were, say, again, I'll just use the council because they're the easiest ones to kind of like use as representation and kind of an estimation, is that you think about it like that. You know of these things. You know these guys are out there. You know, powerful dragon slaying magic is in, and you know your reach and the level of reach that the people in power around you are willing to go to kind of like make sure you feel safe and secure. I could easily see there being some form of art, like not an artificial, but like some form, not an artificial dragon slayer in the same way that like, say, like 4th gen is. Maybe that's how Mishima could do more with 4th gen, I don't know, but more of like an artificial being. Like, say they literally just took the DNA of like all these like extremely powerful people, like all these peak legends throughout the centuries or something. Maybe we can get a couple lore bits on some random characters that were just cool and powerful at some point, but merged all into like this new being who they made into a dragon slayer if they ever had to fight Acnologia or something. You know, something like that. Maybe they know about the dragon gods and it was their last resort weapon too. I imagine it has to be something of that scale. When you really think about, like, Ethereon, again, this is the last thing I'll mention. Like, when you think about the escalation of them, escalation of the weapons, and not just, like, ancient weapons of different classes throughout the series, but specifically the Council. We knew about Ethereon first. Ethereon was something that could, you know, affect an entire country in their world. Their countries are huge, but, like, from their standpoint, they're still countries. Whereas Face would affect the entire continent. The Dragon Cry could also completely obliterate the entire continent. The Phoenix could wipe out the world. Like not stuff that like the Council has, obviously, with like the last two. Dragon Cry was the royal family, and the Phoenix was something completely split up. But you know what I mean? It's like an escalation of understanding these crazy threats that they have knowledge on. And it's different, obviously, like Acnologia is something they didn't have control, whereas like something like Ethereon Face they did. If whatever comes after Face is something that is again, that just kind of like check marks on stuff that's going on Dragon Slayer, extremely powerful Dragon Slayer, potential world-ending threat, and it could potentially be that 7th spot, because there's still like, if Mishima's going to keep the whole Dogromag spot in the Dragon Gods, because I do think now there's 6, it's kind of like guaranteed Natsu will become the 7th, especially with the confines of the story and like how he's progressing and stuff with Igni and whatever. But if there is a 7th, maybe it could be something like that. And one thing about Mishima, and I do actually have to add one more thing, Mishima loves every once in a while to do a secret boss. He loves doing secret enemies out of nowhere. He's always done. He loves just having a character that isn't in the setup as like the fights are revving up, popping out. Look at like Blue Note. Look at like Zero. Look at Marred Gear. Look at someone like Shuda, or someone like Lucia, or Ziggy. Like there's a lot of these characters he likes. He loves having these characters that you don't kind of like see as things are really setting up. Like if you see it like in a game, it'd be like there's one spot, like if you had a tabletop game, there's one spot that like you can't visibly see. You know that he's hiding something. If you just don't know what it is, he's gonna pop it out at some point into the events. But we'll see. Anyway, that's something I really want to talk about. I really thought it was intriguing the way that Mishima had Igniel and Elefsaria in the wording of these two things haven't said exactly the same. So I just wanted to talk about the possibilities of that, because it's like with 100 Years Quest, there's like when we started out, we only really knew that it was the 100 Years Quest and the Dragons and stuff. But it's completely different at that point versus like I'll just use Eden Zero because Eden Zero is Mishima adjacent. When you have right now Eden Zero, there's still a lot of plot lines hanging up in the air because the story isn't in nearly as far as like how Fairy Tail is. At the point where we got the 100 Years Quest, there's a lot of like the big stuff is wrapped up. So Mishima has been introducing new plot points in the story as it goes, versus Eden Zero, it's like we still have a bunch that are hanging there. We are not getting like tons of new ones with old ones resolved. We do have some resolved, but way more stuff is coming out. Whereas like with 100 Years Quest, we again started out with the Dragons, we knew that, but then we started getting all these other kind of pieces in the story that are adjacent to events going on, but not directly in line with it. It's a completely new point that is the shop. It's, you know, it's like a side quest as you're doing it, but obviously it's way more important to like the world and the story as things are going. But anyway, other than that, comment below, thumbs up the video, friend, like button, subscribe, and check out my other videos. But other than that, appreciate every subscribe. Thank you all for listening. Bye.